Welcome to another exciting episode of Humanity 8.0, a podcast where we talk about our post-truth present and our transhuman future, with the aim of sketching out the outlines of what awaits us in the years and the decades ahead of us. This podcast is brought to you by Rokos. Companies with limited IT budgets and personnel can now get the same cybersecurity protection as big enterprises. Rokos' Secure Access Service Edge, SASE solution, with Zero Trust, provides enterprise-grade comprehensive cybersecurity so that you can focus on your business. For more, please visit www.rokos.com. That's ROQOS.com. And now, here's your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo.
Karina Montoya, welcome to Humanity 8.0.
Hi, Ahmed. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you. This is a very, very busy week, probably a historic week. It started with the Google trial, right? Which I think is a watershed moment. Is that right?
Yes, correct. I think for anyone who has been covering technology, business, antitrust, just a combination of everything, it's an important week. I think there are two groups that are very involved in the developments around the case. On one side, you obviously have journalists who are accredited to attend the courtroom as press. And on the other side, you have lawyers, historians, other journalists too, working for organizations such as Open Markets Institute, other think tanks that are very closely following what's going on in the courtroom with the arguments, and who are trying to explain, I guess, more from a historical perspective and also from more of a legal expertise. What is it that the arguments that the DOJ mean, and also what the arguments that Google's lawyers are giving mean? Obviously, I think for anyone who's been following this so closely, we sort of assume a lot of things that everybody knows about this case, and it's so important, but people don't really know that.
Exactly.
You know.
Can you for somebody who uses Google, and they think it's a really nice tool, and beyond that they really don't know any of the stuff that's going on, where would you start to get them to say, this is interesting and important, and I probably should follow it? How would you sort of get them interested?
That is a great question, and I've also been trying to figure out how to explain it to my mom, for example, who actually she doesn't have an Apple phone, or an iPhone. She uses Android. Mm-hmm. I'm South American, so the Android market is enormous outside the US. Yep. But okay, in general, just for anyone who uses either an iPhone or Android, or in general for anyone who's just living on Earth and using digital platforms, mm-hmm. I would say it's important, number one, because if you really start thinking about the different services that you use to communicate with friends and family, to get news, to look up for silly things like, why does my back hurt? Or like, I'm getting these weird pimples on my face, like, what is this? You use Google services. You have an email with Gmail, probably. If you want to watch something on TV that you miss, you probably go on YouTube. And then, again, for search, and this is where the case is built around. I don't think a lot of us as users, we have questioned, what is it that we only have Google as a search engine? Aren't there any other companies that can provide the same thing? And there have been for a long time. And so then you start wondering, okay, but how is it that we always have Google, right, on everything? And so the case is basically questioning everything that has happened in the background, um, for Google to be the default choice or the default option for everybody who's using any mobile device. And in general, legally, there isn't anything wrong with striking agreements in which you want a provider to, I guess, put you in a prominent position in terms of the, a mobile device or a laptop or whatever. But it does become a problem when those agreements restrict the ability of that partner that you're signing the agreement with to also look out for other options. If there are other competitors in the market that can provide the same service, and then you start striking an agreement with different suppliers of phones that only you are the only one that can be the default option for a browser. And in those agreements, you just basically don't let any other of your competitors to even start conversations with those same suppliers about maybe changing their minds, and also making a space for them to be a default option. That becomes a problem, especially if you're already a big company who has a large market share. Um, and if you have basically an infinite pool of money where you're setting inadvertently a floor for everyone to compete around those amounts of money that you are paying to the suppliers of phones and mobile devices in this case, in exchange to give you a preferential treatment, right? And if you go to the FTC's website and look up for exclusionary agreements, they actually have a very clear explanation of when this type of agreements become a problem. And it is mainly because they create this high barriers of entry for other competitors to do the same.
Yeah.
And so if you compare now a user of any phone in Europe versus the United States, what is going to happen in Europe, because this hasn't happened yet, is that whenever you turn on your phone and you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna like set up my email and my different things that I usually use, you're going to be prompted on the devices that you have all these different providers of different services, email, search engine, navigation. So this problem of striking deals, commercial deals that are, by the way, secret, to have other manufacturers of hardware give you a preferential treatment. And not only that, but also just dictating the rules of how they're going to display that preferential treatment to the users. Hopefully, we'll see the DOJ making a clear case that it has prevented other competitors from also being as successful as Google. It's a very big question in terms of not only antitrust, but also, I guess, from a consumer perspective. If you are using a product really because it is the best and there's nothing else that is involved in that choice, or is it that you are being pushed towards making a choice?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very important question.
Okay. Well, yeah, that sounds very familiar to what Microsoft was doing, or maybe still doing way back in the late 90s, when they were sued. And they had all these deals with hardware where the operating system was out of the box and the browser was the default browser and so on. But let's go back to the consumer, right? Your regular person like me, who, let's say, I use Google, I'm happy with it. It does the work that I want it to do. And therefore, I don't see the pain, meaning the pain obviously is, imagine if there was competition, maybe the product would have been much, much better. In addition to the problem, of course, of you have a company that has so much information about so many people and has so much power and so on. But for just for the average consumer, right? Why should they care and how can we make them care? How do we go beyond it being an
Yes.
issue that very quickly becomes sort of arcane in the mind of your average person who's just going and using this tool and is happy enough with it, not to think that there's a problem.
Yeah. So this is more of a personal analysis. So this is not coming from an expert background on consumer legislation or consumer rights or anything. But what I think it's very tricky with have to care, but for anyone who's curious and wants to understand, right, is that the way businesses compete in the conditions under which they do it have all of these different ripple effects. So it's not only you as a consumer, because if you are a consumer, you may just want to have everything for free, like yay, we don't pay for anything. You want to have the cheapest fare to take a taxi, right? You want to pay the cheapest for clothing, just for everything, and we understand that. I understand that too. But in terms of the digital markets, I would say a search engine specifically, it's a gateway to the entirety of the digital information that people provide. So let me give two examples. If you have clothing store, for example, right, and you want to look for what are the top best clothing stores in my area, and then you only have Google as the sole provider, their algorithms are designed a certain way that will show you a certain number of businesses that may not necessarily be the ones that are closer to you, or maybe they will, but they will have characteristics that I as a user would not know, and I would just believe what I see, right?
Yeah.
If there was another competitor, another search engine that maybe has a different way of showcasing results, that would also affect it will materially affect how all of these other businesses are advertising themselves online. It will affect your choices as a consumer too.
Yeah.
So in the real world, I mean, right? And so it's not so much about let's have a million search engines. It's more about, are we going to let only one company that has amassed so much power to define everything that we see online, and that affects our behavior and our choices in the material real world?
Yeah, yeah.
And that affects not only where we're going to go shopping, it also affects our own understanding of reality. So when I say the search engines are the gateway for not only what businesses provide, but what people provide, now everybody has the power to start a blog, start a video channel, start a podcast, and when we want to find out about any news that may be, chaotic and that we don't understand, and then we look, for example, what's going on with Google. There is a trial, enter, right? And what are the answers that are going to come up? And that is embedded. And in honesty, we don't really know how those algorithms work anymore. It's a trade secret. There aren't really rules about how to make those rankings, right? And maybe that's fine. That's a different conversation. But if we only have that as the only gateway, I think that shapes very significantly our view of the world. If we don't have any other options.
Yeah. When I speak with someone and say, Google, the Google monopoly is bad, they say, "Oh, I don't see it bad." I say, "Well, back in the late 80s, people were grousing a little bit about AT&T, which was a monopoly, right? But nobody meaning consumers, were not really like rebelling, right? They were just putting up with it because they didn't see what could happen when you break up things and you have competition, and so that's although it's imperfect, it gets them to think that maybe if we do the same thing, we'll get a much better world that we can't even imagine now. Because I don't think people could imagine what happened with the cell phone revolution. I don't think the mobile revolution could have really happened as fast and so on without the breakup of AT&T, which was, I remember, I mean, dating myself, I remember you have to wait like 2 weeks for the phone, and they have to give you the phone, and they have to install it for you, and it was like living in, I don't know, it's living like in a third world country, if I want to use that word, right? Where you have to wait actually for a private entity which has no pressure from anyone else to do its thing in its own pace, in its own way. So I usually try to do it that way. Then they're like, yeah, I grasp it. Let me ask you this: do you think that companies like Facebook, they are successful because everybody uses Facebook? Sort of like it's an interesting thing, but with social media, right? It's interesting only when people start using it, and everybody's going there, and they have one platform. They need to, and they don't have three or four. Do you think that like Facebook and Google should become regulated as a like water, like utility, right? Public utility. So that, yeah, you are a for-profit organization, you have more or less monopoly, but you are going to be regulated because now everybody's using you the way they use water, the way they use whatever, right? You are an infrastructure thing, and therefore there are certain obligations. We need to have certain transparency. The government should be able to ask you to do this versus that, within obviously the constitutional limitations and so on. What do you think about that option?
Yeah, so that is an option that I actually came to learn as I started my job here at Open Markets, and that I support now, in the sense of, I do think that when companies or corporations, they are in a quest to become the infrastructure or the underlying, it's basically the underlying infrastructure to where everything transpires, and Google has been very clear about it, at least in the search market. We want to organize the world's information. That comes at a cost.
Mm-hmm.
You're no longer just one company that has 1,500 employees and that affects one specific area of one specific city. You are now a corporation that has tremendous power and tremendous influence in the world. And so there is this common carriage regime, that is what you were referring to, and that applies to basically regulating the behavior that these companies, several markets in the United States, and not only in the United States but across the world, where this type of regimens exist, or this type of frameworks exist. I think that right now, because we are very focused on what's going to happen in the litigation front, we are yet to see how we are going to incorporate other remedies for the reality that we live in today. Because yes, a lot of people may say, so what's going to happen if we interrupt this infrastructure that's become so ubiquitous, right? What are our other solutions? We may not ever be able to or reorganize the market in a way that these monopolies will cease to exist. And if that's what's going to happen, then they need to behave under specific special rules where public oversight matters, which is what is not happening today.
Yeah.
And I think, me personally, I've come to question a lot of things that I think in general, in the last 20 years, we've just accepted as they've come, because everything was so innovative and so cool. We've seen the evolution of a phone that was black and white screen to basically supercomputer in our hands. And that's amazing. I can for anyone who lives abroad and has family all over the world or friends all over the world, it's amazing to have that kind of connectivity. But I don't think that gives them a free pass to just do anything they want and take advantage of our data, take advantage of their dominance in certain markets, take advantage of also our enthusiasm as consumers to see that technology does such a good thing in our lives, that has such a good effect in our
Yeah,
lives, right?
exactly.
So that's sort of the way I think about it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think the let's call it, I don't know, to the extent that it does exist, the invisible hand is no longer at work to guarantee the welfare of, because the competition is going to result in problems solved, because of the logic of competition. When there's no longer competition, that no longer can be happening, right? Meaning, you know, quality of the product, service of the customer, all of those are competition points that somebody might say, well, you messing, you have a good product, but your service sucks. So I'm going to differentiate myself on service, and people may shift that way or that way. But when you don't have competition, you don't have any of that, and therefore, I think it's really hard for me to see Facebook continuing the way it is, being almost, I think it's a utility, because it's the only way for me to stay connected with my mom in Algeria and my brothers and sisters and so on. And it's not trivial value that I'm able to know exactly what's happening. I see pictures of my nephew and so on and so forth. Definitely, I can tell you that before Facebook, I was far less connected to my family back home than I am now. It has created really something valuable. So, and the fact that there's one Facebook, right, is important, right? I don't see like them having three or four, or I prefer this, I don't know, MySpace, and they prefer Facebook, or do I have accounts in several of these places? So therefore, I don't think there's a way for us to avoid having Facebook become regulated as a utility. I really don't.
Well, I would just say two things to what you just mentioned. The first thing is about competition.
Yeah.
I think we forget, and I include myself, that competition, or the way businesses compete to position themselves as the to-go place for consumers, whatever it is that you sell,
Mm-hmm.
has always been arranged by public policy. Public policy is not a thing that arises from, or it shouldn't be in any case, something that arises from the decision of some politicians over there that we don't know about. Public policy is made to reflect what a society would want a market to be organized. Like, what is the way that we want to organize a market, and also what are the behaviors that we expect from businesses when they have reached a certain size, and they are in, especially when they are provided services that are very vital. And so you have that kind of regulation in healthcare, for example. You have that kind of regulation in the food industry. So if you all of a sudden want to sell sandwiches, you just can't go and sell them however you want, right? There's an expectation that I'm not going to die if I eat this sandwich because of whatever it is in there, right?
Yep.
I think that we haven't, but we are going to that. I think we are in that, like, we are going towards that direction of understanding that digital services and products that affect our relationship between our digital lives and our real lives, or our material physical lives, should be just in that same level. They have a psychological effects. Like you say, now they are the infrastructure for me to communicate with my family. Recently, there have been discussions of what happens with all of my digital assets when I die. Like, who takes care of it? And there's real pain for people who have lost relatives and they can't either erase their accounts or recover pictures. I recently listened to a podcast. I think it was Slate. What next? I thought it was so interesting because it's something that it personally happened to me with a friend. that I lost at a very, early age. Like, and it was kind of like a wake up call to me as well to I guess solidify the reason why I cover these things or why I care about these things, because it is no longer just, oh, my phone, or I just want to find this online.
Yeah.
It's really has really permeated everything in our lives. Even I drive a car and I go to a new city. I don't know where I'm going. I need a navigational system.
Can't do
And
that.
so, right, and so that's one thing. Competition, it has always been arranged and has always been effective of public policy. Private actors have always revolved around it. The idea that private actors are just magically going to fix things, I think that's been an illusion
Yeah.
that we've installed in the last 20 years, but maybe that's for a different conversation.
No,
and,
the last, I don't know, 200 years with Adam Smith, right?
yeah, I mean, within my lifetime for sure, maybe longer than that.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And just about Facebook, and like you said, there's only one Facebook, right? But we need to remember that Facebook had challengers, and it was Instagram and WhatsApp at some point. And yes, they weren't exactly the same service that Facebook offered, but they provided a layer of the services that
But
Facebook offered,
before that,
right?
there was Friendster, there was MySpace, and
Yes, of course. And
yeah,
I think when I had my space, and there was another one that was called High Five, that
yes,
it grew very fast in countries that were in the US or outside the US.
yeah,
And I think Facebook was good. They had a really good proposition. It was great. It was going to be free. Supposedly, they were always going to be free. They had all these promises that they made to consumers in terms of privacy. And
yeah.
the reason why I think people started preferring Facebook was because they gave that level of privacy that MySpace didn't when all of this news coverage started coming up about
Well, I
data
think
privacy problems, right?
I remember the interface was just much better. It was cleaner and neater, so anybody could use it, as opposed to, I think, MySpace was a lot more chaotic, which was good for folks who wanted to be in control of how they. Yeah, but anyway, go ahead. Sorry, interrupting you.
No, it's fine. And I think I'm not going to say that I think Facebook was the result of lessons learned from other competitors. Like, that's how
Right,
it works when you want to make a product better.
right, right.
But then when you reach a certain point when you don't have to worry about anyone else challenging you, right? That is when you can just do whatever you want, and consumers just have to accept it, because where else are we going to go if you're blocking all of these other challengers from even offering a new option to users? And I think Instagram and WhatsApp, for me at least, I was one of the first users, and I've seen tremendous change that I don't like, and I can't really do anything about it because now they're part of Facebook. And if I don't want Instagram to show me any recommendation from any accounts that I don't follow, I can't do that. And it's like,
Yeah,
now I can only just pause that, and every 30 whatever months I have to always pause. I'm like, what
yeah,
is if
yeah,
this was a smaller company, I'm pretty sure people made comments about it when Twitter was what it's not today. Users made comments about the things that they wanted to see in the platform, and that would happen. Like, we had a voice in
yeah,
the design
yeah. Now it's
of
one
those
guy
products, right?
fighting for us. Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and the story of Facebook, and if you look, I mean, if if you go, if you have gone to their Wikipedia page, the number of acquisitions they've made is tremendous, and most of those they just bought and snuffed out, right? And it's clear the reason why he was really scared, Zuckerberg, about Instagram. He thought that it was going to take over. It might have taken over, right? Meaning it had been number one or a competitor. And
We'll
so,
just never know.
and it's clearly it was a complete. It was definitely a monopoly trying to maintain its monopoly, I believe. But it puts us in this place where I think maybe a public utility model perhaps is the way to go. And maybe for Google too.
You've been listening to Humanity 8.0 with your host, Dr. Ahmed Bouzid, founder and CEO of Witlingo. Brought to you by Rocos. Thanks for listening.